Hello and welcome to the Real Biz Life Chronicles, where we discuss all things business, branding, and life. I'm your host, Tracy Fryer. My guest today is Emily-Jane Sarroff. She is a graduate of architectural design, a J. Shetty certified life coach, which I can't wait to hear more about. She is a business mentor, a social media figure, and is the host of the Empower with M podcast. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation today, as Emily is also a fellow brand strategist. And I thought it'd be really beneficial for you guys to hear from someone else just how important a brand actually is. Em, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for our chat.
Yes, definitely. Like I always say in the beginning of the show, we're going to speak about branding, and that is one of my passions. But first, I'd love for you to give us a bit of an insight into who is Em.
Yeah, so my name's Emily-Jane Sarroff, but you guys can just call me Em. And really, my journey started about 4 years ago when I was studying my Masters of Architecture, and I had about 6 months left to go before I was fully done with that degree, which I had invested like 4.5 years into up at that point, as well as, over $40,000 in student debt, which had been accumulated as well. And I reached this point in my journey when I was 22 years old, where I was starting to question that path that I was on. I was really starting to feel this misalignment. I had this perfectly laid out path that I had been following for years. And then suddenly I'm being pulled in a different direction. I'm being pulled to explore something that was totally different to architecture and was in the online space. And that's really where I started to play with the potential of starting my own business. And the thing that really drove me at that point in time to take the leap and to step away from the path that I was on was this internal conflict that I was experiencing. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners have experienced this at some point themselves, where it's like your head's pulling you one way and your heart's pulling you another. And I really had to right. We've all been there at one point or another. And that was a very pivotal point for me, because at 22 years old, I hadn't really had to make any major life decisions for myself outside of that bubble I was in of studying and school. And here I was now questioning everything that I had ever known and really feeling this pull to jump into the unknown. And so I did make the decision to obviously quit my master's degree, quit my 9-to-5 job, and go all in on starting a business. And within just 8 months of doing that, I had made my first 6 figures, and that really opened the gateways to this path and this journey that I'm on now, empowering other business owners and guiding them in their journey to doing the same.
Amazing. Do you mind to unpack a bit more on that internal conflict that you had? Because I think a lot of us, and I can speak from personal experience, we have that internal conflict, but so often we try and push it down, or, it could be someone close to us or family that, they kind of push it down for you. Do you mind to give us a bit more of an insight into what that was like for you?
Yeah, I had actually pushed that feeling down myself for some time without realizing it. It was in my 4th year of studying. So before I stepped into my master's, that was when I really first started to get that feeling of I don't love what I'm doing, but also I don't know what else I would do. And that's kind of what was coming up for me in that moment. So it was that, not really knowing where I wanted to go, or not really knowing how to figure out and explore that feeling that was coming up in that moment, that caused me to push down that internal feeling that was coming up. Now, the reason why it was about probably maybe a year later was when I then took the plunge to step away from my degree. The reason why I then listened to that nudge that was happening was because it was screaming at me at that point. It was screaming at me, saying, Emily, do something, change what you're doing now. You cannot continue on this path. And I knew that if I was going to continue on that path, then my mental health, which was already in a negative state, my physical health and my emotional health, which were all deteriorating. I knew that if I wasn't going to listen to that nudge, then I was going to wind up in a position where maybe I couldn't return from, right? I don't mean to be dramatic, but I was in a very negative space. I was unhappy with the life I was living. I hated the degree that I was in by that point. I was unfulfilled at the job I was in. I was crying every single day because I was I'm 22 years old and I feel this way. Why is this happening? And so it was because that feeling was then forced at me at such an intensity that I then actually listened to it and was like, okay, well, I can't continue on this path any longer. So what are my options? Where can I go from here? Where am I being pulled by my intuition right now?
And how did you deal with, I mean, as you said in the beginning, it's almost 4 years of your life you've invested in this degree. There's obviously the financial cost as
Yeah.
well. How did you, because I imagine that would kind of keep you stuck in that place for quite some time as well. How did you kind of separate and sort of say, right, I'm going to take this path. That is what it is. I'll just kind of work through it.
Yeah, great question, because I did experience a part of that thinking coming up of like, oh, well, I've committed to it for 4.5 years. What's another 6 months to just complete it? Like I may as well see it through. There was a piece of me that felt like stepping away meant that I was quitting. And so there was a lot of like internal work I had to do, some conversations I had to have with myself to really reframe that and to really start to view it as, well, it's not quitting if that isn't in alignment with me and I'm leaving it to pursue something greater, something that is deeper in alignment with myself. But there was so much that did come up for me at that point in time. But I think just like my ability to come back and address those thoughts and those feelings in the moment and have that conversation is what helped me move forward. And to come back to your question, like I didn't understand what the sunk cost fallacy was at that point in my life. It's only in the last year or so I've actually learned about what this concept is. But the sunk cost fallacy, for any of our listeners who don't know, is when you look at how much time, money, or energy you've invested into something, whether that's a career, a degree, a relationship, and you allow that investment to keep you stuck in that place because you've invested so much already. And so that was playing out a bit for me, where I was like, I have invested all this time, money, and energy. Like, should I just see the next 6 months through and wrap it all up in a nice and pretty bow? And again, it came back to me then having to refocus my mindset towards the opportunity cost of staying in that position for another 6 months. And so when I started to get that clarity on like, I wanted to start a business, I wanted it to be around my podcast, I wanted to be building a brand in the online space. And I thought about, well, what is the opportunity cost going to be if I neglect working on that for the next 6 months just to get a piece of paper and say that I finished a degree? And that opportunity cost for me outweighed the cost of stepping away from that degree that I was in, because I knew that 6 months of intentional planning and focused work and brand building towards a vision that I actually saw a big picture potential for, I knew that that was going to be more valuable than spending the next 6 months just getting a degree that I literally had no intention of using after that.
Yeah. And because we're all about practical advice, was there a tool that you used? Did you journal? Just so our listeners, if they're perhaps in the same boat, there's something that they can do to really help them kind of figure out where they might be at?
Journaling was the biggest thing for me at that point. I would journal pretty much every day. Like that was the main form of personal development I was doing, was just like developing self-awareness of what's actually going on in my thoughts, what's actually going on with my emotions, and just having that intimate conversation with myself. And even like just journaling on the vision that I had, what is the potential of what I want to step into, and just getting total clarity on all of those different aspects. And alongside of that as well, I was very selective about who I had conversations with on the topic.
Right.
Because I knew that everyone in my immediate circle, like my friends, my family, my boss, they're all aligned with my values, but they're not in the entrepreneurial space. And so whilst I trust their opinions and I will seek certain types of counsel in them, they weren't the people for me to have the conversation with around the business I wanted to build, because none of them were in the space. They were all living the 9 to 5 plan, right? And that wasn't where I wanted to be anymore. So I didn't want to share too much about my vision with those people, because I knew that they wouldn't understand it. And of course, I expect that they're not going to understand it. Their mind and their visions are aligned in a different direction. And so for me, it was then finding who can I talk to that gets where I'm going, that understands what I want to be doing or is already doing what I want to be doing. And so that's when I started to create more friendships in the online world with people who were doing online businesses of some sort or were coaches of some sort. And I just have conversations with them and drop little, like bounce little ideas back and forth off them to really help me expand what I was already creating for myself.
And I think you touched on something so important there by being quite selective with who you have those conversations. I think from personal experience, I've tried to speak to, certain people, and when they don't have that understanding of where you're going and growing, you can sometimes get quite a different, response as to what you're hoping for, which can be quite disheartening.
Yeah, completely. But I guess it's to put it into a really simple example, you wouldn't go to a painter and you wouldn't ask a painter their advice on, the flu that you're experiencing, right?
Yes.
You go to a doctor to get the advice on the flu you're experiencing and how to move forward. And a lot of people make the mistake to go to the wrong people to ask for their opinions on a matter that that person actually knows nothing about. And I see this a lot as well when, particularly in couples, when, let's say, for example, there's a woman who comes to me and is like really, really wanting to build a business for herself, and she wants to make an investment in herself, but then out comes, the objection of, oh, but I need to talk to my partner about it. But her partner is a tradie and living the 9 to 5 and has a different, way of thinking to what she is playing in. And so you've got to be so mindful of who you're whose advice you're taking on board. You can for sure ask the people around you, but also just be mindful of like, what is the bias that's influencing the input they're then going to give to you? And is that in alignment with the way that you want to be making decisions for your future?
And Em, you mentioned alignment quite a lot, and I love it because I think it's, important that whatever you're doing in life, I mean, life is so freaking short as it is, that whatever you're doing or where you're spending your time does align. How do you gauge if something aligns with you or not?
Yeah, this has been a journey for me over the past few years to really discover. And I feel like at the start of my business journey, I really nailed it. And I was like, yep, I feel this, like it's in my body, like it's like I just feel it in my gut, it's that gut feeling of intuition for me. But then what happened is there reached a point in my journey where my self-trust got shattered because of a relationship that I was in that really drifted me away from my intuition. And so then it became this process of having to relearn how to trust my judgment and relearn how to get myself back into alignment after experiencing that relationship. So yeah, it's been a massive journey for me where it's like I started with this deep sense of knowing and then I lost it and then I've had to come back to it. And for me, it does come back to, again, that feeling in my gut. Like I will feel it in my body if it feels right or if it feels wrong. It doesn't need to make logical sense for me in order for it to be right. And if I'm trying to make too much logical sense of it, then it's probably wrong.
Yeah. And I've noticed through your social media and even speaking to you, you have a very fierce energy. And I hope you're comfortable for me to ask the next question.
Yeah.
With your relationship that you experienced, do you mind to unpack a bit how that kind of pulled you a bit away from your, I guess, your core alignment, shall we say, and then how you had to rediscover yourself and bring yourself back? And the reason I asked is because I noticed a number of very fierce women. They, land up in a relationship, they kind of forget who they are, they kind of make that their priority, and they lose themselves in it. Are you happy to unpack that a bit with us?
Yeah, for sure. So
Right.
at the end of my first year of business, I had experienced burnout. So once I made my first 6 figures, I burnt myself out because of the unsustainable approach that I had taken to really making that, right? And so when I was in that state of burnout, I then attracted a really low vibrational relationship into my life, given that that was the energy that I was really playing at that point. Like I was in a vulnerable position. And so I attracted a partner who ended up being quite a domestic violence partner on a emotional, mental, and sexual level predominantly. And so what then happened, like me being in that weakened state, stepping into that relationship, I was very easily influenced by him and projections that he would put onto me about, my worth and what I'm capable of and what I'm not capable of. And over time, like after taking on board those projections over and over and over and over again, I really became distant from that powerful, fierce version of myself. And in fact, anyone who knows me that saw me at that point in my life could just see that I had become a shell of a human. Like I wasn't me. I didn't have my energy. I wasn't happy. I was just surviving in life and business. I wasn't growing. I wasn't expanding because of that relationship that I was in. And so in order for me to actually leave that and step out of that, it then became this challenging journey of having to reclaim my power while still in that relationship, while
Yeah.
still receiving the abuse and the projections, that he was putting onto me. And that in itself was one of the most character building
Oh,
experiences of
wouldn't
my
you?
life. And I mean, look, I wouldn't wish it upon anyone, but hey, at least I lived to tell a tale.
Yes.
But that truly, I think back to that time because I was very young at that point. Like I'm only 26 now, and
Oh, yeah.
I was about 23 and 24 while I was in that relationship. And so
Yeah.
I was and he was about 33 at the time. So he was quite a bit
Okay.
older than me as well. So he had a really big influence on my self-esteem in that relationship. And I remember when I think back to like the lowest point, it was very similar actually to when I reached that low point with my degree. And it was like, make or break, it was like either continue on this path and know that you're going to end up in a worse place, or do something about it. And I really reached that point in this relationship as well. Prior to that point, I didn't quite take the action because I allowed the fear to speak louder. But then it
Yeah.
reached the point where I literally realized I was waking up every single day feeling like there was just this dark cloud over me, feeling miserable, feeling like life shouldn't feel this way, business shouldn't feel this way. Like, what is the reason why I'm even living right now? Where
Yes.
it was a wake up moment of like, well, what are you going to do to change that? You can stay on this path and the path doesn't look pretty for where it's going to end up, or you can choose a new path right now and start to build yourself up to fully lean into that and, take control of that. So that was really, again, like, yeah, it was similar how it was different situations, but
Yeah.
similar sort of points at each.
And then what would your advice be to someone who is in that situation? Because let's face it, it takes balls to step away. And I think not just women, some people get trapped in that relationship. And because they identify so much with that relationship, it's very hard to step away. What would your advice be to someone who's perhaps finding themselves in that situation and, they're too scared to step away. They don't quite understand that it's very intense short-term pain for long-term gain. What would your advice be to them?
Yeah, well, what really worked for me was creating a way to anchor into the potential of what I do want, and so being like in the business space, I was already so focused on trying to, narrow in on a vision. Because I was in such a survival state, though, I couldn't really get creative. Like I actually really struggled to create a vision for myself. So I imagine that if anyone else is in that position and you are in that state of survival, it is probably going to be hard to do the traditional ways of creating that vision and getting clear on where you can go. And so what really worked for me was having actual anchors in my environment that was showing me the potential of what I could step into. And that anchor for me, like the biggest anchor for me to get out of my relationship, was a new friendship circle that I found. And so
Right.
I actually went down to the dog park because I had a dog with my ex, and I would go to the dog park, and all of a sudden I ran into one of my old friends from school. And I saw his dog running across the top of the hill, and I was like, that dog is familiar. Let's go and like see if that's him. So I went
Yeah.
up the hill, and at the top of the hill was my friend from high school. And he welcomed me in and he introduced me to all of his other friends at the dog park. And all of a sudden, every day I'm going to the dog park and I've got a community to really be around. And then when it reached a point in that relationship where I could see that my ex was trying to stop me from being around those people, it was like that was the happiness in my life.
Yes.
And when I could see that someone was trying to take that away from me, that was the thing that allowed me to go, well, I choose this over you.
Yes.
And so having that external anchor, whatever it may be, whether it be some sort of a vision board or a friend or a community or something external to yourself and the house that you're living in that moment, find something, because that is, if you can't creatively come up with ideas because you are stuck in that survival state and you can't creatively think of something better for yourself, go and find something better for yourself. And when you physically experience that, that for me was strong enough to allow me to then pull myself out.
And I imagine being in an environment where you've made this decision, you're going to step away, but you still kind of you got one foot on the other side, right? So you're still in the relationship. You've got this person that pulls you down. You want to, you've got this anchor that's pulling you. Were there any tools that you kind of used during that transition phase, I want to call it, besides the anchor? I mean, if you've got someone who's constantly banging on and trying to pull you down, did you
Mm.
have serious mindset blocks that you used or?
I had a business coach at that time,
Hmm.
because I always work with coaches, and this was a female business coach specifically that I had at that time. And I would jump onto the weekly calls and I would basically be crying every single week on the call. And I had someone who was in the position that I wanted to be in business wise, who was able to give me counsel as well on
Yeah.
where I wanted to be going and how I wanted to be changing. And so having those conversations where, she would basically just talk back and forth with me, like coach me back and forth. And I would be telling her what I want and what I don't want and that I want to leave and this. And she would be someone I could borrow strength from, right? Like to
Mm.
really make that decision to step away as well. So again, it comes back to community and having someone in your corner who again is aligned with where you're going, aligned with what you want, and someone that you can really trust, right? Because if I didn't have that trust and that respect for my coach at that time, I probably wouldn't have lent on her as much as a
No.
strength in that moment to be able to step away.
Hmm. And I love how you shared that she was, did you say she was giving you strength? Is that what you said?
Yeah, really,
Yeah.
like, I was able to borrow strength from
Yeah,
her,
that's
right?
embarrassing. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, it really highlights the importance of number one, community, and also having a coach or some sort of mentor in your life as well. And I love the fact that whilst you are a business coach yourself, you also still have coaches. Is that correct?
always. I've got multiple at the moment for, like, all different aspects of my life and business.
So how many do you have at the moment?
So at the moment, I've got, like, a overall, so he's probably, like, my big business coach. He helps me with, like, events and speaking and leadership development.
Nice.
And I have a female business coach as well for that female perspective. And, I think that women just bring like a different approach to business to the way that men think. And
Yeah.
she's also great for discipline as well, helping me build that.
Hmm.
Then I have a coach for sales. So specifically like narrowing down, niched on my sales skills and how to close better on sales calls. And then I have a fitness coach as well.
Oh. And
Mm.
for our listeners who perhaps don't have even one coach, how important do you feel having a coach is?
Oh, so important. Like at the very beginning of my journey, the reason why I was able to grow to six figures so quickly was
Yeah.
because I invested in a coach. And I had a conversation with myself at that point because I had saved $10,000, which was my security blanket for when I left my job. But I also
Yes.
came across a mentor at that point who to work with. It was a $10,000 investment.
Oh.
And I had to make a decision of, do I hold on to this security blanket or do I invest in this mentor? And I decided to invest in the mentor because I knew where I wanted to go. And I also knew that there was a big knowledge and skill gap that I had, which I needed to overcome in order to get that result that I wanted. And for me, I'm all about saving time. So I would
Hmm.
rather spend money in order to make more time for myself and speed up the process to actually getting to where I want to be. So if
Hmm.
that's the kind of person that you are, then like 100% get a mentor in your corner because yeah, sure, you can teach yourself everything. Chat GPT is great. You can jump on
Yeah.
and you can get a whole business strategy from Chat GPT if you want, but there are going to be problems with the integration. And so the way to reduce how to speed up the rate at which you can fail and actually see results is by having someone in your corner who can give you that direct and personalized feedback.
And also that honest feedback as well, and call you out on your own BS. So it's really
Massively.
helpful. I'd love to chat more about brand. It's a passion of mine, as I'm aware, it's a passion of yours as well. Through your social media, you have such a sense of authenticity. You're so real. You are quite comfortable being vulnerable, which not a lot of business owners are. How
Mm.
important do you feel a brand is, not only as a personal brand, but a business brand as well? And how does it help one's business grow?
Yeah, and I'm massive on being authentic, being transparent, being vulnerable on social media, because they're all big components of what my brand
Mm.
actually is and just who I am as a person as well. But the importance of having a brand when building a business, especially in this day and age, is so important, right? Because from a consumer perspective, consumers are shifting away from wanting to buy from companies and instead wanting to buy from people, which is why so many companies now partner with people, right? Like you think of Nike and all of the influential people that they've partnered with over the years. But even when
Mm.
I think back to the start of my business journey, one thing that I didn't realize I was doing at that point in time was prioritizing brand building. So in
Yeah.
the 12 months before I actually launched my business and I was just, growing a social media and growing a podcast just for the fun of it, I was building a brand. And I didn't realize at the time, but I was building a brand. And so again, like when we look at the kind of growth I was able to make in that first year of my business, it was because of that groundwork I had put in with establishing a brand, building a
Mm.
community, and actually creating a way for my audience to like, know, and trust me before I even started selling. So this is
Mm.
why branding is so important, especially in the online space, which is, being oversaturated every single day by new coaches and new business owners popping up left,
Yes.
right, and center. Having a brand is what's going to separate you from the masses and
Mm.
actually allow your audience to create that emotional tie with you so that they will eventually then want to buy from you.
Mm. I come across so many business owners, some of them have been in business for 35 years and they say, "Oh, I've got a logo, I don't really need a brand." What's your response to those type of comments?
Yeah, I find it interesting because I feel like
Um,
there's a lack of awareness around
mm.
the importance of brand. And I think that everyone really understands what marketing is, but they don't
Yeah.
understand as deeply what branding is. And they assume that all they need to do to grow is to market. But the
Yeah.
reality is, in order to succeed at the highest level, the biggest companies or the biggest personal brands out there, they know how to integrate branding and marketing together
Yeah.
at the same time. And so
Mm.
that's really the point of difference, right? Is those people who have that mentality, like you mentioned, they're so focused on marketing. And yeah, sure, they're probably getting results, but there's also probably a big leak in those results, whether it
Mm.
be in client retention or like the lifetime value of the customers that are coming through, or something else within the community. There's missed potential happening by neglecting the importance of a brand.
The analogy I like to give is that branding and marketing, whilst they're two different concepts, are like dating, right? So marketing is like asking someone on the date, and branding is the reason they say yes.
Yes.
Yeah, people think they're the same thing, but they think they are two separate things, but they work alongside each other.
Exactly. The branding is the relationship building. And
Mm.
I liked my analogy is a little bit more crude than yours. But
Go for it.
I always say to my clients, especially like new clients that come on board and they're like, I want to start selling straight away, but they haven't done any brand building. I always say to them, if you're just going to go straight in with selling, it's basically like walking up to a stranger on the streets and
Mm.
asking them to go fuck in a bathroom without even getting to know them first, right?
Totally. I might
The
use that one
chances
now.
do it, right? Because if someone came up to you and did that, you're going to
Oh,
run the opposite way, and it's going to be a hard
totally.
no. And that's
Yes.
how it feels when you sell to an audience without actually doing any brand building. So the brand building is walking up to them, complimenting them, asking to
Mm.
exchange contact details, setting up a date, going on a second
Yeah.
date, and then on the third date, asking to sleep with them and getting a
Yeah.
yes.
I love that you shared that. Thank you for that. And where do you find is the best place to start building a brand? How do you work with your clients in that sense?
Yeah, there's really three steps that I would say to anyone
Hmm.
who's wanting to build a brand. The first step is concept. So it's brainstorming. It's just conceptualizing, like, what do you actually want your brand to be? What are your
Mm.
values? What does your brand represent? Really just brainstorming and starting to create a collage of the vision that you have for your brand. Once
Mm.
you've done that brainstorm and that conceptualization, then you can go into actually creating a refined design. And so this is where you then start to actually build out your brand toolkit and really intentionally select your colors, your fonts, and all those assets that really support representing and integrating your brand on social media. And then the third stage is the integration and embodiment stage, where you begin to integrate your brand into your storefront, whether that's social media, your website, your podcast, whatever that may be, and also begin to fully embody the brand in your life, in and out of your business as well. And that third piece is honestly one of the biggest pieces that I don't think is talked about enough, is needing to actually become a walking, talking, breathing embodiment of your brand, and not just playing dress up on social media and presenting yourself in a certain way, but actually showing up in integrity to how you present yourself every single day.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think, as you mentioned, a lot of people tend to put a facade on social media or on their website, and then you meet them, and there's quite a disconnect between what we see online and the actual person in real life.
Massively. And that's one thing where you don't want to be creating that disconnect with your audience. And I think a mistake that people also make when it comes to branding is being so focused on what they think their brand is, instead of paying attention to how their audience actually perceives their brand. And that's where that disconnect really happens, is where you've got this idea in your head of, well, this is what my brand is, but your audience can actually see how you show up. They actually see what's behind the facade. They can feel the energy of what's out of alignment with what you're doing. And so then their perception of you and your brand ends up being very different to the perception that you thought they had of you and your brand.
No, 100%. And a lot of business owners as well, they tend to build their brand and they make it about themselves. But at the end of the day, it doesn't need to be about that ideal client on the other side, and that person that we want to attract into our business. Because again, using your word alignment, if your brand aligns with that ideal client, then it's going to naturally generate more leads and more sales as well.
Exactly that.
Em, are there any other branding tips or advice that you have for us?
I would say one thing that's coming up, which is a conversation I've been having quite recently, and it's funny because it really ties back into my degree in architecture. I've been talking a lot about how my understanding of architectural design is really helping me as a brand designer to create a whole other level of brands, online and offline. So one brand that I am building personally myself is called Mentors and Mimosas. And this is actually a event and networking evening that I put on. And what's really stood out about this event, and it's gained such massive traction in the last 8 months of having run these events, is the depth and intentionality that has been put into bringing brand design into the actual spatial design of the experience. And one thing that stands out with this event and this brand that I haven't seen many other brands in the event space actually do is paying close attention to how us as humans use and perceive a space, and then creating and integrating design elements with the brand in the space to amplify the overall user experience. So one thing that I would encourage our audience to do, whether you're designing a brand that can be experienced in person or an online brand or a product or whatever it may be, is to start to actually think deeper about the experience that you're creating and the sensory experience that's connected to that brand that you're creating. Because when you can really facilitate and design a brand that pays such intentional attention to all of the senses of how someone is going to experience that thing, that is how you create a standout brand.
And I love how, even though you walked away from your architectural studies, it still feeds back into what you do. And I have a very similar background. So I studied visual arts. I was like, I'm going to be an artist. I'm going to paint all day and draw nudes and carry on. And studied for 5 years. After that, flew with an airline for 2 years to have a break, moved to Perth, and I studied branding and graphic design. And there was a long time I thought, why the heck did I waste 5 years of my life studying visual arts? Like I said, drawing nudes, painting away, all this stuff. But it's only now that I'm a business owner do I realize how the two have merged together. And a bit like yourself, it gives us this kind of additional layer to how we kind of see things, how the brands we create have those multi-dimensional things that are considered, as opposed to just being a very kind of surface level thing.
Yes, exactly that. And that's the difference, right? And as you know, like a brand, the core purpose of a brand is to create a feeling, right? And when you can, I think as creatives, it's really easier. It's a lot easier for us to really start to visualize and get creative about how we can actually stimulate those sorts of sensory experiences. So I completely understand you with that.
Yeah. And the other thing, I was watching your one of your reels, and you spoke about after you had stepped away from your studies and stepped into your business owner world, you said that my soul felt alive. Do you mind to unpack that a bit for us?
Yeah, for sure. I
By
think,
the way, I stalked you.
back to that feeling. What was that? Sorry.
By the way, I stalked you.
I love a good stalk. Please stalk away.
It's crazy how that word's become acceptable, but never mind.
It's the intention behind it, right?
I'm preparing for today.
Yeah, well, for me, like when I talk about, my soul feeling alive again, it's like, as we've spoken about in this episode, I've experienced that in different capacities, like at the start of my business journey, after coming out of that relationship, and even now as I start to like pivot and step into some even bigger visions within my business. And it's just that that for me is that feeling of alignment, right? Like when you can feel the energy in your body that like you are being called into something so much greater, and you are truly like on purpose with what it is that you're meant to be doing. And that for me is that feeling of alignedness in my soul, is like that. It's at that activation of like, yes, what I'm doing is what I'm meant to be doing. And when you've experienced the opposite, then it's so much easier to actually identify when that alignment is coming up. But if you haven't really experienced the opposite, sometimes you can let that feeling slide a little bit. And I think that's what happened for me at the earlier stages of my journey, is when I felt that aliveness in my soul start to come up, I hadn't quite experienced anything too much of a contrast to that up until that point. And so I didn't really act on it as strongly as I would now. And so when I feel that feeling come into my body, because I've experienced what it feels like to be at the total opposite end of the scale, like now I know to act on it. And I don't want our listeners to have to reach the opposite end of the scale to be able to recognize those little signs of inspiration or alignment coming through. And so to avoid that, like I would challenge you to start to sit with yourself really intentionally in stillness and calmness, and develop that awareness around your feelings and what's going on in your body, and what are the different, the duality of emotions that you experience in your day to day, so that when those tingles come through of like, oh, this is my soul on fire right now, like you're so much more tuned into them, and then therefore it's easier for you to lean into it.
I don't know for you, but I love journaling, and I've made it a part of my daily routine probably for the last 2 years. And I kind of find you've become a lot more in tune. Like you'll pick up on stuff. I sound a bit out there, but a prime example was I went to go and meet a client yesterday to have a proposal meeting. And when I parked, I was like, for some reason, I got this message that I'd accidentally, when I was working late, saved over their proposal with another client's proposal. Don't ask me why I thought that. Anyway, go to the meeting, rock up at my laptop, all ready to go. And truce Bob, I had honestly saved the document. I'd lost the proposal. And I was like, oh my soul. Luckily, I could just put on a fake happy face for 5 minutes and quickly like redo it. I don't know how, but I just find like you become so much more in tune to things. Have you found it's the same?
Yeah, it is. It just comes back, I think, to understanding yourself more. Like when a lot of us we tend to neglect getting to know ourselves on that deeper level, and use excuses such as I'm too busy, or I'm too this, or I'm too that. And when you're not taking that time to actually get to know yourself, like that's when you end up in jobs or relationships that just aren't serving you, and you start waking up and you're like, what am I even doing here? Why am I even experiencing this? Like this doesn't feel like what I want to be experienced more of in my life. But also you don't know what you want to experience more of until you discover that. And I'm grateful that I discovered really early, like in my life, the power of journaling and self-reflection. And I feel like that's why, at 22, I was able to take those leaps and make dramatic life shifts and go on this personal development journey I've gone on, because I opened that door early. And so, no matter what age you are, it's never too late to start developing self-awareness. In fact, it's probably the perfect timing as it's happening for you. And so to have that mentality of like, okay, well, I'm feeling called to this right now. Let's start to explore this. Let's start to go within, and let's start to just build that relationship, with yourself.
And do you think most people don't do it because they're actually nervous too? Because it is quite confronting. Let's face it. You have to deal with a lot of your own demons, the good stuff, but the demons as well.
Yeah. I mean, for sure, right? Like that's definitely one fear. I think like on one level, you just don't know. Like I didn't really know like that personal development was a thing, but then for others who have maybe gone through some heavier things in their life, there's a level of avoidance, right? Like what is it that you're trying to avoid? There could be some emotion or reliving something from the past. And so there could be many reasons why people don't take those steps forward, whether it's just a lack of awareness or if it's a level of avoidance. And no matter which one that is, like, again, there's no right or wrong. It's not good or bad. It just is. And once you develop the awareness around that, then that's when the journey really starts to begin. And it's a progressive journey as well. One thing that I've learned, especially because I feel like the relationship that I was in was probably like one of the biggest things that I've had to heal from in my life. Yeah. And so that for me, like I even found at the start of that healing journey, there's a lot that I was avoided to and I wasn't really ready to lean into. But then progressively, by continuously just having this intention of like, no, I do want to heal. I do want to work towards growing. I do want to work towards getting to this next point. Progressively over time, like incrementally, I was able to take steps forward to start to peel back the layers and go within and release what needed to be released and address like maybe those parts that I was avoiding for some time as well.
And Em, let's talk challenges, because being a business owner is, it's very fulfilling, it's great, it's fun, and we can live our best lives. But there's also the other side of that coin where it can be really, really hard. What's your advice to navigate through some challenges, especially the business challenges that keep us up at 12 at night or 2 in the morning? What would you advise to someone who's currently struggling with those challenges and perhaps having a very bad thought of getting a job?
Oh, yes. Well, that's one thing, right? Like the business is a certain type of hard, like working a 9 to 5 and living that life, that's one type of hard. And then, having your business is another type of hard. So starting a business, you're not escaping all challenges and it's not going to be easy and effortless. In fact, business is probably the biggest expense, like personal development experience you could go through. For me, it's been such a massive, like personal and spiritual journey for me, not just one of like, working on my finances, but like a massive journey of just working on myself. And what's really helped me navigate every single challenge is a couple of things. There's a quote I always say to myself when I feel that like, that the reaction happened in my body by being triggered by something that's challenging, a new learning curve. I always say to myself, don't wish that it was easier, wish that you were better. And in fact, I actually like to change that quote. I don't like to say wish that you were better. I like to say ask how you can be better. So wish that it was easier, ask how you can be better. And then that tells me, okay, well, if I ask myself, how can I become better at this thing? What's the gap that I need to bridge? Everything in your life and your business that you desire, the only thing separating you from it is a knowledge and skill gap. So I always ask myself, what's the gap? What do I need to learn? Who do I need to hire? Like, what is this piece that I need to overcome? And then I have patience. I've been regulating my nervous system when I find myself getting all emotional about challenges in business, which as women, we do that a lot. We're very emotional beings. It's just how we are. But the thing with business and the thing with problems in business is you can't solve them with emotion. You have to solve them with logic. So regulating my nervous system when I feel myself becoming dysregulated over challenges in business, and then regulating myself so that I can move forward with logical thinking. But maybe a third piece to add to this is your connection to your vision and why you're doing what you're doing. For me, it doesn't matter how big the challenge is. It doesn't matter how long it's going to take me to overcome it. I can see so clearly the potential that I want to step into in my life. I can see what that looks like. I know that it's out there for me. And I know that if I just continue to work on myself, I will get there. And that's the thing that doesn't stop me from quitting, right? If I didn't see my potential so clearly, then maybe I would turn around and go back to a 9-to-5 job instead of putting in the effort to actually overcome the challenges and build the resilience and become the leader who has those things that I want. So it's really a combination of, your mindset, and your vision and your connection to that, that's really going to help you navigate those challenges.
I'm so inspired by your drive, your passion, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way. You're a very wise soul, I think. You've achieved so much in such a short time frame, and I think that's something you should be really, really proud of.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And tell us, what is next for you?
Oh, so much is next for me. I've been doing so much, like going within on just my vision for 2025, right? Because we're
Yes.
so close to that now.
Oh.
A big thing for me is stepping up into working with a higher level of client. I'm going to continue to serve the client that's the new business owner that I've been working with for the last 4 years. But I'm also now stepping myself up to start working with 7-figure business owners and really stepping into that creative director role within their companies to help elevate their branding and their visions, and also working a lot more in the events space and bringing brand design to life through the spatial design of events as well.
Any plans to come to Perth?
I mean, I'll come to Perth if opportunities calling. I've got some connections over there. A couple of my clients are in Perth, so if opportunities calling, I'll book a flight.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, keep me posted. If you had one bit of advice that you could give your 22-year-old self, what would it be?
It just comes back. It always, whenever I get asked this question, it just always comes back to self-trust for me. Just to fully trust myself and to trust that even if it doesn't work out, I will be okay. Whether it's business or whether it's life related, like I think that self-trust piece is really like the core pillar to it all. That's going to keep you feeling grounded and keep you on path with where you want to be going. So yeah, it would be to just trust yourself.
Well, I needed to hear that, because being a woman and an artist, I'm a very emotional being, and often I'm like, my life is going to end, and then my advice is it's going to be okay. Just, chill.
But even as like an artist, right? Because that's what like my personal hobby is, creating art as well. And I would find when I would be working on really big art pieces, and then I'd feel this like, oh, do I do this stroke here, or is that going to ruin this? And then I'd go, just trust yourself, Em. Just do it. Just go with it and trust that it's all going to come together. And so it is, right? Like we need to trust ourselves, especially as women.
100%. Em, where's the best place for our listeners to go should they wish to connect with you?
I'm so easy to find. I'm at Empower with M on Instagram. So that's where I hang out the most. I do lots of live streams, to do trainings on Instagram, and just post fun content to just inspire your creativity and your branding and marketing. And if you want to listen to my journey and literally go all the way back to 4 years ago and listen to 22-year-old M at the very beginning of her journey, you can do that on the Empower with Them podcast. We have over 200 episodes because I started that right at the very beginning point of all of this personal development work. So you can really go back and hear the experiences from in the moment on the podcast.
Well, Em, you're an absolute powerhouse. And yes, if you haven't been to Em's social media, especially Instagram, have a look, because it's an absolute inspiration to the amount of content, the amount of authentic content that you're putting out there. It's really great to see. Thank you so much for our chat today.
Amazing. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. Take care.